Welcome back. Today we are going to start sheathing the subfloor. The first thing we want to do is mark 4 feet from each corner that we're going to establish the line for the subfloor in order to make sure that it's straight. And we do that because the rim joist, while it should be straight, may not be exactly straight. It can wave a little bit as you put the joists in, so snapping a line will establish an absolutely straight line that the rest of the subfloor will follow, and it will just make the installation more predictable. Because the front of the house isn't backfilled yet, I don't have good access to this level in order to get sheathing up here, so I decided to use the tractor. This actually worked out really well. I had to get down and kind of just heave it up as you're seeing. There's good footing on the back of these forks, and there's certainly no weight concerns for the tractor itself. So this was a good solution. I did have to climb up off it a bit awkwardly, and I find another solution to that one later. I will say at the outset that laying this sheathing has been on my mind for quite a while. And the reason is because since I'm building this house myself, I don't know exactly how long it's going to take me to get the house dried in. So this subfloor will absolutely be exposed to weather. And I've seen nightmare issues where subfloor has buckled or you have to sand down all the seams because they swelled because of the rain. I did a lot of research, and I think everyone probably knows this in the construction industry. The Advantech subfloor sheathing is the proposed solution to that. This sheathing is 3/4 inch sheathing. It comes with a 500-day exposure guarantee. And since last summer, we had 6 weeks of almost continuous rain, which interrupted our footer pour. You can imagine that we'll get something similar this year in terms of rainfall, and it's just something that had been concerning me. So my solution in this case is really to just trust the product, follow the proper installation instructions, and hope that it will perform the way that they say it's going to perform, in which case I don't have a lot of concerns. I certainly do expect to have the house dried in by the end of the year, so I imagine we'll be in pretty good shape. If you haven't used this subfloor, it's tongue and groove on the long side. So the short sides are flat, so they butt up to each other pretty nicely. I'll also say that they're pretty robust, especially on the groove side. The tongue side, it's still particle board, this stuff. The reason it's a little bit better in the weather is because they have treated it and it's glued with weather resistant materials and bonding agents and such. But the groove side is pretty resilient. The tongue side, not quite so much. And what I found is if there is a little bit of damage, you want to take care of that before you start laying it. As mentioned in some of the earlier videos, I am overbuilding quite a bit of the house just to make sure that it's solid and it feels good, when we're living in it. I actually considered going up from 3/4 inch subfloor to the 1 1/4 inch subfloor, but again, after doing some research, that just seemed unnecessary. Really, what they were saying for that 1 1/4 inch subfloor is if you're going to have grand pianos or something like that, that it has a lot of point load in between the joists potentially, then that's a good idea. But for what we're having, we'll have nothing like that. So I decided to just go with the recommended 3/4 inch subfloor. As with the joist hangers, the subfloor as well, I'm preferring to use screws rather than nails or a nail gun. The reason being, again, just that the screws really pull the subfloor tight down to the joists. I can see in almost every screw that I'm getting another, 1/8 inch or 16 inch of flattening as the screw is pulling it in. And nails just aren't as good at doing that typically. And mostly, especially if you're using a nail gun, it's just because the nails are coming out of the gun so fast that they're getting into the joist before it can fully suck down the subfloor to the joists. If I were doing this professionally and I had to do these, every day of the week, certainly I'd probably find a more efficient way to do it. But for me, this is a good way to just ensure that the end product is really nice. So this is an example of why I didn't add blocking to all of the joists when we were putting up the joists. So if you can see on the left, this joist, the bend in it just has it falling not where I need it to for the sheathing. So I'm able to just add a strap and pull it so that I've got an even amount of nailing on both sides. And that again just continues to help with reliability and predictability of the install. Then I'll go back and put the blocking in after the fact when I'm doing my punch list and finishing up the subfloor before I start the wall build. The other thing is on these sheets that are on the edge, You may have noticed I'm neither gluing nor screwing anything on the rim yet. I'm only doing everything in the field. And the reason for that is because when the entire subfloor is done, I can go back and double check that the edge of the subfloor on the rim is flush. And if it's not, I have a couple of choices. If it's incredibly minor, like a 16th or something, it's not a big deal. If it's more than that, I can try to adjust the position of that rim, and you just can't do that if it's glued and screwed. Here again, the tractor is just a big time and effort saver. You might be able to see there my solution to getting off this thing is I pre-positioned a ladder under where I knew the forklift would be for ease of getting down. But I think I'll end up doing this about 10 times to get all the sheathing up onto the subfloor. But by the time we start building the walls, or shortly thereafter, we should have the backfill completed on the front side of the house. So getting materials up to this level will be significantly easier after that. Now that I'm on the second row, I'm cutting a 4-foot section of sheathing in order to stagger the subfloor row to row with a 4-foot overlap. But before committing to the second row, again, I'm just double checking that the grooves are clean and the tongue is clean so that I get a good fit, but also that this whole first row of subfloor is perfectly straight. The problem that you'll find if you don't have that subfloor completely straight is that at the seams, when you're trying to do the overlap, if there's any variation from sheet to sheet, that you can create a fulcrum or a proud point right in the middle of the sheet on the next row, which makes getting the spacing correct very difficult. So ensuring that first row is completely straight and there's no variations from board to board is really important. I did go ahead and snap a line for the second row as I did for the first row. It shouldn't be necessary if that first row is straight, but this just gave me another point of reference to make sure that all of the spacing was going to go the way I wanted it to. So not a lot of extra effort, but just a little bit more confirmation that the spacing is correct. After gluing the joists, it's important as much as possible to try to drop the subfloor sheathing in place so that it doesn't slide back and forth too much. If it does, it'll just smear the glue off of the joist, and that will it will reduce the effectiveness a little bit, not enough to worry too much about. But again, if you can drop it straight on and then just make that movement back into the groove, that's the best way to do it. As I mentioned, the groove side of these boards are really resilient. I've got a 2x6 beater board that's, I don't know, 4 foot long, and I beat it pretty heavily with the sledgehammer against that groove side of the subfloor, and it didn't really incur any damage at all. So I was really happy with the structural integrity of this sheathing. Because this section of the house is 24 feet wide, as is the other section, and because the beam in the middle is 8 inches, it means that I'm going to get a really nice overlap of the subfloor sheathing on both sides of the beam. So that just makes for a really nice connection, and it also ensures that there's a flat point where the joists meet the beam, and there's less opportunity for sagging or for movement in the future of the subfloor itself. I heard many carpenters say that it's really nice to have more than one person to do subflooring in order to help get that seam in place. And I don't disagree at all, but this is definitely something you can do by yourself, especially if you spent the time up to this point making sure everything's flat and level. That effort always pays dividends in the future, and this is an example of that. We did get some rain on and off for a couple of days while I was doing this, but as I said earlier, I'm already committed to just trusting in the product and not worrying too much about it. You know, when I bought the subfloor screws for this project, I thought I was going to be getting a box of loose screws, but instead I got strips of these 25 screws. So I was like, well, I'll just use them instead of, replacing them or whatnot. And quite frankly, those strips were super helpful because it just, put all the screws in the right orientation. And whether or not you have a screw gun designed for those strip screws or not, I would suggest getting those if you're doing it by hand. This is the last load for this side of the house. For the other side of the house, I'm actually going to start laying the subfloor from the opposite side because if you remember, each section of the house is at a slightly different angle, which means the joists are at a slightly different angle. And if I tried to run all the way from this side to the other side, I'd end up having a bunch of angle cuts. So I will start on the far side and meet in the middle. And so I'll have fewer angle cuts ultimately, and it'll just be, again, easier for the install. As you know, I like to talk a little bit about cost along the way. So for these 45 sheets of Advantech 3/4 inch flooring, it cost me about $1,400. That's in 2023, which isn't too bad. You could probably cut that by almost half if you used cheaper materials, but that's just not the place to cut expenses in my mind. So here what I'm doing is at the end of this run, I don't want a piece of subfloor only touching two joists, so I really want them covering three joists. So I'm just going to clip off the end of this 8-foot sheet of subfloor so that I have enough room to put in a section of subfloor that's going to cover this last section of three joists. It just makes the subfloor itself more stable. So this side of the house is mostly done, minus a few details that we'll take on next time as we do the other side of the house and finish up punch lists and get ready to start building the walls. This is where I'm at. Thanks for watching. See you next time.